Module 1, Lesson 1, Nature of Communication. At the end of the two lessons under Module 1, these are the competencies expected of you. Number 1, to demonstrate an understanding of the nature and elements of oral communication in context. Number 2, to define communication. And number 3, to explain the nature and process of communication. If you'd like to assess the level of learning you have acquired in Module 1, try to go back to these objectives, and in case you failed to meet any of these, let me know so I can explain it to you further. Every day we communicate. Communication happens through conversations, poster, billboards, or glances over the room. In fact, most communication occurs without much effort on our parts or even opening our mouths. So, how does communication start? Communication starts with an idea. And to be able to communicate, you must have an idea or a notion. You must have something that you want to express. Why is studying communication very important? It is because all of us have a need to be understood. Defining communication. According to one of the many definitions of communication, communication is one of those everyday activities that is intertwined with all of human life so completely that we sometimes overlook its pervasiveness, importance, and complexity. When we say pervasiveness, it means existence. When we say importance, it means relevance. And when we say complexity, it only means that there is more to it than what we know and what we understand. To put it plainly, Little John and Foss suggest that communicating feels so natural to people that oftentimes the act itself is taken for granted. In addition, according to Bulan and Billion's book, Practical Speech Fundamentals, communication functions in more ways than you can imagine. Again, complexity, there is more to it than what we know or what we understand. At this point, let us learn about the etymological definition of the word communication. Etymologies help us understand the language better. It can also teach us about the common root of words in several different languages. That often means that we can recognize words in other languages without being told exactly what they mean. The root of the word communication in Latin is communicare, which means to share or to make common. It is also defined as the process of understanding and sharing meaning. At the center of our study of communication is the relationship that involves interaction between participants. Hence, communication is stirring up ideas in the mind of another, sharing of ideas among a group of people, and imparting concepts to an audience. To understand better the process of communication, here are 4 models as discussed by communication scholar Dennis McQuail in his book McQuail's Mass Communication Theory, published in 2005. Models help us understand how things are as they illustrate relationships of components. So what should we consider? What should influence our ideas? These are none other than our past experiences, culture, attitude, values, knowledge, and feelings. These elements influence our unique perception or the way we view things around us. In order for communication to work, it has to be two-way. So just imagine with me a football game. Before an idea can be transmitted to another person or group, we must encode this data first. We must place information into codes. In other words, we encode. The people who encode are called encoder. The encoded idea is called the message. The message is collected by the receiver, and it is the receiver's task to provide a feedback since communication is two-way. Once the cycle has gone full circle, it will repeat the cycle for as long as the conversation continues. We can even say that the sender and receiver changes roles throughout the process, depending on who is sending the message and on who's responding. First communication model, Transmission Model 1 by Harold Laswell. Laswell's communication model was developed by communication theorist Harold D. Laswell in 1948. Laswell's model of communication is regarded as one of the most influential communication models. It is also known as action model or linear model or one-way model of communication. It is relatively straightforward and tells you that communication originates from someone and their message flows through a channel, either through sound waves or light waves, and that someone on the other end receives the message with a corresponding effect. The major criticism of Laswell's model is that it does not include feedback and it ignores the possibility of noise. Without feedback, a communication process cannot be fruitful. Laswell's model is very linear and does not consider barriers in the communication process. The model is also criticized for being very general and only including very traditional topics. The model is very simplistic. The model is said to be propaganda-based as it is more focused on the resulting outcome and generally used for media persuasion. First communication model, Transmission Model 2 by Shannon and Weaver, which is a more mechanical look at communication. Shannon-Weaver model of communication was created in 1948 when Claude Elwood Shannon wrote the article titled A Mathematical Theory of Communication in Bell's System Technical Journal with Warren Weaver. Shannon was an American mathematician, whereas Weaver was a scientist. The mathematical theory later came to be known as Shannon-Weaver model of communication or mother of all models. This model is more technological than other linear models. There are 6 concepts in Shannon-Weaver model. Number 1, sender or information source. This refers to the person who makes the message, chooses the channel, and sends the message. Number 2, encoder or transmitter. This refers to the sender who uses machine, which converts message into signals or binary data. It might also directly refer to the machine. Number 3, channel. This refers to the medium used to send message. Number 4, decoder or receiver. This refers to the machine used to convert signals or binary data into message or the receiver who translates the message from signals. Number 5, receiver or destination. This refers to the person who gets the message or the place where the message must reach. The receiver provides feedback according to the message. And number 6, noise. This refers to the physical disturbances like environment, people, and many others which do not let the message get to the receiver as what is sent. According to Shannon-Weaver model of communication, there are 3 levels of communication problems, and they are: number 1, technical problem, which asks the question how a channel causes a problem. Number 2, semantic problem, which asks the question, is the meaning of message sent and received very different? And number 3, effectiveness problem, which asks the question, how effectively does the message cause reaction? First communication model, Transmission Model 3 by Wesley and McLean, where communicator relays his or her account of selection or views. Wesley and McLean's model of communication was suggested by Bruce Wesley and Malcolm S. McLean Jr. in 1957. This model was an adaptation from Newcomb's model of communication, which talked about co-orientation for simultaneous orientation in a two-way communication. The Wesley and McLean's model can be applied in 2 contexts. Number 1, interpersonal, and number 2, mass communication. The point of difference being the feedback. Feedback is direct and fast in interpersonal communication and indirect and slow in mass communication. The model also differentiates message as purposive and non-purposive. The following are the advantages of Wesley and McLean's model of communication. Number 1, there is concept of feedback. Number 2, as the message comes from the environment, sensory field improves the message formation. Number 3, social and other factors are included in objects of orientation. Number 4, the model can be applied to interpersonal, group communication, as well as mass communication. And number 5, the model is very descriptive. On the other hand, the following are the disadvantages of Wesley and McLean's model of communication. Number 1, There are many variables even for simple communication, which makes the model very complicated. Number two, the model is only two-dimensional and does not explain communication which involves multiple messages and complicated messages. And number three, the information can get modified while sending it from the sender to the receiver as there can be noise. The model does not account for noise in communication. First communication model, Transmission Model 4 by George Gerbner. Mr. George Gerbner is one of the pioneers in the field of communication research. His works are descriptive as well as very easy to understand. He is working as a professor and head of the Annenberg School of Communications in the University of Pennsylvania. In 1956, Grubner attempted the general purpose of communication models, where he stressed the dynamic nature of communication in his work and also the factor which affects the reliability of communication. Second communication model, ritual or expressive model. This is an alternative way of looking at how communication works since its emphasis is on the intrinsic satisfaction of the sender or receiver rather than on some instrumental purpose. Ritual or expressive communication depends on shared understandings and emotion. It is celebratory, consumatory, and decorative rather than utilitarian in aim, and it often requires some element of performance for communication to be realized. Communication is engaged in for the pleasures of reception as much as for any useful purpose. The message of ritual communication is usually latent and ambiguous, depending on associations and symbols that are not chosen by the participants but made available in the culture. Medium and message are usually hard to separate. Ritual communication is also relatively timeless and unchanging. In other words, the expressive model is a communication which takes place because there is a need to share understanding and emotions. Third communication model, publicity model. This model explains that communication involves audiences as spectators rather than participants or information receivers. Attention becomes the measures of how successful the communication took place. In publicity model, communications professionals use persuasion to shape the thoughts and opinions of key audiences. In this model, accuracy is not important and organizations do not seek audience feedback or conduct audience analysis research. It is a one-way form of communication. Fourth communication model, reception model. This is an open process, which means that messages sent and received are open to various interpretations based on context and the culture of the receiver. In other words, there might be various meanings to a single statement that is communicated. This is Wilbur Schramm's depiction of cyclical communication, where the sender and receiver have alternating roles in the loop, where the communicator or encoder produces and sends the message, and the one who receives is called the decoder. Another reception model is one by David Berlow that accounted for factors that affect how communicators are influenced when they send and receive a message. This shows that it is not just about saying the message but also considering how the message may be received because of the factors that may affect reception. For example, it is ethical that when you are about to break a bad news, you must not say it in a straightforward manner. You must consider how the other person will react to the news. Life lesson: it is not what we say that matters, but how we said it. According to James chapter 3 verse 8, no man can tame the tongue. This should tell us that the only hope for the tongue is the Spirit of God. Unless we bring unto submission to God our words and verbal responses, can we tame our tongue. Our tongue is very powerful. It can either make or break us, make or break people, or make or break relationships. Here is a point for reflection. Which among these models do you think describes your communication habits or patterns most? That will be all for Module 1, Lesson 1. Thank you very much.